Imagine standing face to face with someone who looks human, but isn't quite like you. Their forehead slopes back. Their brow is heavy. Their voice sounds familiar but different. Now imagine this. You don't just meet them. You slept beside them. 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens did not walk alone. We shared fire, we shared territory, and we shared something far more intimate. This is the ancient code, and tonight we uncover 10 shocking facts about how sapiens mixed with other humans. Fix one image in your mind. 3 lineages, 1 collision. Around 300,000 years ago, early Homo sapiens appear in Africa. By 400,000 years ago, Neanderthals are established across Europe and Western Asia. Powerful, cold-adapted, resilient. Somewhere across Asia, another branch spread, the Denisovans. We barely know their faces, but their DNA tells us they were widespread. Then, around 70,000 years ago, something shifts. Sapiens begin expanding out of Africa in waves. And if you leave Africa, you don't enter an empty world. You pass through the Levant. A narrow corridor, a funnel, and it was already occupied. For the first time in tens of thousands of years, different human populations share the same landscapes. Where ranges overlap, contact becomes possible. Where contact becomes repeated, exchange begins. And where humans share territory long enough, sex enters the story. We grow up with a clean narrative. Homo sapiens here, Neanderthals there. 2 separate species, but biology is rarely clean. The classic definition says, if 2 populations can produce fertile offspring consistently, they are the same species. And modern humans outside Africa carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. That means mating didn't happen once. It happened repeatedly, enough to become permanent. Neanderthals were shaped by Ice Age Eurasia. Stockier, broader, cold-adapted. Sapiens were shaped by Africa. Longer-limbed, different climates, different social networks. Different proportions, different histories, but compatible enough. This wasn't alien contact. It was 2 forms of human recognizing something familiar. People imagine one dramatic encounter, but genetics tells a different story. Multiple pulses of interbreeding, different regions, different times. And it wasn't just Neanderthals. We mixed with Denisovans, discovered not from skulls, but from DNA extracted from a tiny finger bone in Siberia. And then came the undeniable proof. A teenage girl from Denisova cave. Her mother was Neanderthal. Her father was Denisovan. First generation. 2 human lineages producing a child within a single lifetime. This wasn't rare mythology. This was recurring contact along vast borderlands. The Levant, Anatolia, Central Asia. And this explains why archaic DNA is uneven today. East Asians carry slightly more Neanderthal ancestry than Europeans. Oceania carries high Denisovan ancestry. Tibetans carry Denisovan-linked high-altitude adaptation. Different roots, different overlap zones, different encounters. Interbreeding wasn't a footnote, it was a frontier dynamic. But that raises a sharper question. If mixing was frequent, why aren't we half Neanderthal? If hybrids were fully compatible, archaic DNA would be evenly distributed across our genome. It isn't. Scientists find large regions, especially on the X chromosome, where Neanderthal DNA is almost completely missing. They call them ancestry deserts. Why would some genes survive while others vanish? The strongest explanation is fertility. In many species, hybrid incompatibilities hit males harder. The X chromosome is deeply tied to reproductive biology. If certain Neanderthal-derived variants reduced male fertility, even slightly, natural selection would remove them quickly. Evolution is ruthless about reproduction. So the genome tells us, yes, sex happened. But not all hybrid lines thrived. Some sons likely had reduced fertility. Some lines quietly ended. Think of the genome like a library. Interbreeding adds new pages, selection audits them. Pages that help survive, pages that reduce fertility disappear. And once fertility becomes the bottleneck, one clue becomes impossible to ignore: the Y chromosome. Modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA. It shows up in skin biology, in immune-related regions, in fragments scattered across our genome. But one thing is missing. We do not carry a Neanderthal Y chromosome. Not one confirmed lineage survives. And that matters because the Y chromosome passes almost unchanged from father to son. It's a straight male line. If Neanderthal males had repeatedly fathered sons inside sapiens groups, and if those sons had gone on to reproduce successfully for generations, we should still see Neanderthal Y lineages today. We don't. And this is the question audiences instinctively ask. Was it mostly sapiens males with Neanderthal females? Or Neanderthal males with sapiens females? Did the pattern shift by region, by time, by power dynamics? The honest answer is uncomfortable in its complexity. Both probably happened. But the long-term male lineage from Neanderthals did not persist. That doesn't mean Neanderthal males never had children with sapiens women. It means their sons' sons' sons did not survive in an unbroken male line into the present. Somewhere along the way, that branch closed. Why? Possibly reduced fertility in hybrid males. Possibly incompatibility between Neanderthal Y variants and sapiens genetic backgrounds. Possibly demographic fragility. But when an entire male lineage disappears over tens of thousands of years, the absence becomes evidence. Not necessarily violence, not necessarily prohibition, but pressure, biological pressure. And over time, pressure decides which lines continue and which fade. We like to imagine sex as private, personal, romantic. But in small Ice Age societies, sex was never just personal. It was structural. Think like a band of 30 or 40 people living on the edge of winter. You need allies. You need access to territory. You need safe migration routes. You need to reduce the chance that the group over the hill becomes your enemy. You need to survive. In that kind of world, relationships are not just emotional. They are strategic. A union between two individuals can bind two communities. It can reduce hostility. It can secure hunting rights. It can create obligations of mutual aid. It can turn strangers into kin. And kinship changes everything. This is why interbreeding doesn't have to mean constant mixing. It can mean strategic mixing. A few key pairings. Enough to link groups. Enough to soften boundaries. Enough to absorb outsiders into your genetic and social network. Sex, in this context, becomes diplomacy with consequences. And this also explains why cultural overlap matters. Neanderthals and sapiens were not alien to each other. There is evidence Neanderthals used pigments, made ornaments, possibly marked caves, created tools with intention. shared technological traditions in overlapping regions. There is debate about specific claims, but the larger pattern is clear. Their lives were cognitively rich. And when two groups share similar behaviors, tool styles, symbolic objects, hunting strategies, it means proximity, it means observation, it means exchange, it means repeated contact, shared campsites, shared valleys, shared seasonal movements. And where daily life overlaps, sexual contact is rarely absent, not because it's romantic, but because humans form bonds. Trade partners, marry daughters, adopt captives, absorb outsiders. This is how small societies survive instability, through connection, through integration, through expansion of the social web. Interbreeding in that sense was not an anomaly. It may have been a tool, a way to stabilize fragile worlds, a way to convert potential enemies into relatives, a way to merge populations instead of fight them. But there's something else hidden inside that logic. Because strategy is never neutral. When relationships serve survival, they also serve power. And power is rarely equal. When two populations meet under different numbers, different resources, different advantages, intimacy does not always look the same on both sides. Which means if we follow this idea honestly, we have to ask a harder question. Not whether sex happened, but under what conditions, and whether every encounter was chosen. Up to now, we've spoken about alliance, about strategy, about survival logic. But there is another possibility we cannot ignore. When two populations meet under unequal conditions, different numbers, different resources, different levels of stability, intimacy does not always unfold gently. History shows this again and again. When humans expand into territories already occupied by others, contact can include cooperation, but it can also include coercion. We cannot reconstruct individual stories from 45,000 years ago. We do not have witnesses, we do not have testimony, but we do have a clear principle. Where competition exists, where conflict exists, where displacement exists, sexual contact is rarely confined to romance alone. Some encounters may have been chosen, others may have happened under pressure. During conflict, during capture, during negotiation, during survival bargaining. This is not speculation for shock value. It is simply refusing to project modern comfort onto a harsh world. Prehistory had no courts, no police, no international norms. Small groups competing for territory, food, and safety would have operated under raw survival logic. And in that logic, power matters. That does not mean every encounter was violent. It means we cannot assume every encounter was mutual. Interbreeding in reality likely existed across a spectrum: alliance, integration, adoption, exchange, and at times coercion. The genome cannot tell us which was which. It does not record consent. It records only contact. And that contact happened between people who felt fear, desire, grief, and loyalty just as we do, which makes this part uncomfortable. And regardless of the emotional tone of those encounters, one biological truth remains. Bodies met. And when bodies meet, they exchange more than genes, they exchange microbes. And in fragile Ice Age populations, disease can shape history as powerfully as war. Whether encounters were cooperative or coercive, one biological reality remains. Bodies met. And when bodies meet, they exchange more than genes. They exchange microbes. History shows a consistent pattern. When isolated populations come into sustained contact, disease can reshape demographics faster than weapons. Not because pathogens are supernatural, but because immunity is local. Now imagine Eurasia during the last ice age. Neanderthals had lived in parts of Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Sapiens arrived with their own pathogen history, their own immunological background, their own invisible passengers, different immunities, different vulnerabilities. In small, scattered communities, even a limited outbreak can have outsized impact, not because it kills half the population overnight, but because small groups cannot absorb repeated losses. Sex matters here in two distinct ways. First, intimacy is efficient transmission. Close proximity, repeated contact, shared shelters, shared bodily fluids, shared children. Even without understanding microbes, humans exchange biology through contact. Second, and this is the part that complicates the picture, interbreeding also exchanges immune genes. Some archaic genetic variants found in modern humans are linked to immune system function. That suggests that in certain environments, Neanderthal or Denisovan variants may have improved resistance to local pathogens, which means interbreeding may have acted as both exposure and adaptation. A double edge. On one side, contact could introduce pathogens into vulnerable groups. On the other, hybrid offspring could inherit immune variants that help survival in new landscapes. Sex, in evolutionary terms, doesn't just connect bodies, it connects immune systems. And sometimes that connection strengthens a population. Sometimes it weakens it. And here's where the story becomes more complicated. If archaic DNA were always harmful, evolution would have erased it completely. But immune systems are not simple. They are shaped by local enemies, bacteria, viruses, parasites, specific to time and place. A genetic variant that evolved in Ice Age Europe might have been finely tuned to the pathogens of that region. So when sapiens arrived and mixed with Neanderthals, they weren't just exchanging bodies, they were exchanging adaptations, and in some cases, those adaptations stayed. That's why researchers repeatedly find archaic DNA in immune-related regions of the genome. Not because Neanderthals were superior, not because sapiens were weaker, but because evolution keeps what works. Sex became the delivery system for environmental knowledge written in DNA. A shortcut to local survival, which means part of your immune system may carry traces of ancient encounters. And this is where the blade turns, because disease is only one edge of the story. The other edge is advantage. If certain archaic variants improved survival, then interbreeding was not just friction, it was acquisition, transfer, absorption. And once you accept that, the question shifts. Not whether mixing happened, but what exactly we kept and what that says about who we are. If archaic DNA were always harmful, it would be gone. But some fragments stayed because they helped. Neanderthals and Denisovans had adapted to Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years before sapiens arrived. Cold, low light, new pathogens. Interbreeding allowed sapiens to inherit adaptations that already worked. Researchers have linked archaic variants to immune regulation, skin and hair biology, metabolic traits, high-altitude adaptation in Tibetans widely associated with Denisovan ancestry. That is not decorative DNA, that is survival. Interbreeding was not just friction, it was acquisition. Neanderthals disappeared as a people, their languages, their identities, their communities, but genetically, they did not vanish. They diluted, they merged, they became fragments. Extinction sounds final. Absorption is stranger. It means the boundary failed. Over generations, distinct populations blended into a larger one, until the separate identity could no longer stand alone. We are not a pure lineage. We are a mosaic, a composite of overlapping human histories. So what does all of this mean? It means the story of human evolution was not separation. It was contact, not isolation, but overlap. Homo sapiens did not expand into an empty world. We entered landscapes already inhabited by other humans. We fought, we competed, we exchanged ideas, and at times we shared something far more intimate. The evidence is not symbolic, it's molecular. Fragments of Neanderthals, fragments of Denisovans, still embedded in modern genomes. Not enough to keep their cultures alive, but enough to prove that boundaries were crossed repeatedly. And that changes the story. Because extinction in this case was not purely annihilation, it was partial absorption, not a clean replacement, but a blended, uneven, selective, imperfect. Other humans disappeared as distinct peoples, but pieces of them remain, and that is the unsettling truth. The last surviving human species is not genetically untouched, it is a mosaic. And the Ice Age was not just a battlefield of tools and survival. It was also a world of proximity, of encounter, of bodies sharing space. Human history was never a single lineage moving forward alone. It was overlap, and that overlap is still inside us.